In order for you to scale on Meta ads in 2024, you need 3 things. Number 1, budget. You're going to need money to increase your spend in order to scale your business. Sadly, there's no way around this. Number 2, you're gonna need great creative, and you're gonna need a lot of it. And number 3, probably the most important, you're gonna need a fabulous product that people actually want. I call this a scalable product. In this video, I'm gonna go over all 3 of these things, and there's no fluff here, so let's go ahead and dive in. Budget. Let's talk about budget. How do you tactically scale on Facebook ads? Is there a wrong or right way to increase the spend inside of Ads Manager? Yes. However, this is honestly the easiest part when you have a plan. I actually have a spreadsheet that I'm going to give you for free that is gonna help out with this part. Be sure to look in the description bar to get a link to that. But first, I actually want to address this video that I made last year. In this video, I talk about the 2 different ways that you can scale your Facebook ads, and I call this vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. Vertical scaling is simply where you increase the budget on a campaign or ad set, and horizontal scaling is the method of scaling where you add new ad sets, add new campaigns, thereby increasing your budget by adding those additional assets. Now, one of the big things that's changed since last year is fewer of my clients are doing this horizontal scaling method. So they're not adding as many new campaigns or as ad sets unless it is a creative test. Cannot emphasize this point enough, unless it is a creative test. And because of this, my clients that are scaling in 2024 are doing so by adding new products to test, by adding new creative tests, and by simply increasing the budget on what is already profitable. So sometimes they'll add an additional Advantage Plus shopping campaign for a new product or for a new offer, but most of them are trying to keep things as consolidated as possible. And I also heard that Facebook might start docking advertisers who don't keep a more consolidated account structure. So this is really, really important. And if you want to see my consolidated account structure, be sure to watch this video next. So here is the best practice to scaling up on Meta ads in 2024. To avoid unnecessarily triggering the learning phase and adding instability into your account that's not really necessary, you should only increase your budget 20% every 3 days. And that's really only if you want to scale as aggressively as possible. For instance, if you're starting at a $30K per month budget, which is about $1,000 a day, this is what your budget per session should look like if you want to have the most aggressive approach to scaling on Meta ads. So if you want to scale as aggressively as possible, you can see here in column D, I have the percentage increase. And really the most aggressive you should go is 20% every 2 to 3 days. So I have that here right now. Again, you can change this however you want. If you want to do 10%, if you want to do 5%, just to forecast what that could look like on your scaling journey. And then I have the starting daily spend. So because the beginning monthly budget here is $30K per month, that's going to boil down to initially $1,000 per day. But as we start increasing, you can see the forecasted daily spend also beginning to increase. And you'll see here, oh, how much are we gonna have to scale spend by that day? Some days it's going to be $240, $288, really depending on how much you start scaling. And something we'll get into in a little bit as well, you have the creative tests per week, and you can see those starting to increase. And I do have a little note here that really for every $1,000 a day in ad spend, that is going to equal at least 1 creative test per week. I am gonna go more into that in just a bit. But here you can actually see, hey, to scale really, really aggressively, if you wanted to, you could have your monthly starting budget at $30K and then have it end with about $150,000 per month, which is a pretty aggressive scaling plan. However, I have seen this been done before. Now quickly, I want to show you another example of this. Maybe you have a higher budget. Maybe you're doing around $5,000 per day in daily spend, but you don't want to scale as aggressively, right? So we can delete a few of these 20. Maybe you only want to increase spend once a week or so. But it could be a little bit more intense if, oh, you see results are really good, or depending on how you've seen the ad account interact before. But again, you're gonna be able to see, wow, this is actually what it looks like to potentially have the scaling plan. And you can also work backwards. So for instance, if you wanted to double spend by the end of the month or by a specific time period, you can back that into playing with the percentages in this column. There is a big caveat to this, and I will go into that later on in this video. So in the ad account, it should look like this. So here we have an ad account. It's a super consolidated structure. If you want more on that, please be sure to check out this video below. Now we can see the budget set for everything that's on equals $1,000. And according to our scaling forecast, hey, if we scale spend right here, we have to increase by $200. Now, I think the best way to do that, especially when first starting off, is to launch a new creative test, because it's really about getting as many creative learnings as possible. So maybe we could launch a new creative test doing a new UGC angle or something like that at $200 a day and let that go. A few days later, we have to increase spend again, this time by $240. Now, depending on how the creatives and the rest of the ad account is actually going, you're probably going to be distributing budget a little bit. So maybe we're seeing that this ASC campaign is doing really well, so we're gonna wanna increase the budget there by 20%, really as much as possible. And then depending on how much budget you have left over, you can also scale any other creative tests that are doing well, or also deduct the ones that aren't doing as well, or take it off, and then redistribute that budget into something that's performing well, or launch a new creative test. So account-wide, you should really be focusing on what has the best performance. Be sure to stay to the end of this video. I'm gonna share a few stories. You're not gonna wanna miss it. Now, the reason why I wanna share these stories is because you can take the best practice approach, but to be honest, I've also seen brands like 4x, 5x their ad spend in 1 month, and they were totally fine. However, I don't like focusing in on that and sharing with you guys a ton of those stories, because I don't think it's super realistic for small business owners. Because in order to really scale, you're also going to need to scale up production on your product and creative production. And I've run into the scenario a number of times where we've been able to scale the ad account, but we couldn't scale up the production on the product or the creative production. And honestly, this sounds like a great problem until you're in it. If you've ever been in it, be sure to chime in the comments below, because I know you're all winners. Which is why if you're a brand that's just starting off, I would recommend something a little less aggressive. Maybe increasing 10% once or twice a week if you have that capacity. And I want to reiterate, especially when showing you guys the spreadsheet, that sometimes things don't always go according to plan, for better and for worse. All of these rules can absolutely be broken for a product and a brand that's crushing it. I've 2x'd, 3x'd budgets overnight before, and things went really, really well. This is especially for sales periods like Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Now, I want to talk about creative, because this is the number one thing that I see people leaving out in the conversation about how to scale up your business on Meta ads. However, in order to scale on Meta ads profitably and for the long term, you need to scale creative production. So essentially what this means is that you're gonna need to scale the amount of creatives that you're testing and putting out into the world as you increase your budgets. And I've seen a lot of brands and agencies finally discussing this online. The more creatives that you put out in the world, the more likely you are to succeed and get a winner. And I do have a broad rule of thumb for how much creative you should be testing for a brand dependent on the budget. But again, there's a little bit of nuance here. For every $1,000 a day that you're spending on Meta ads, that should equal at least 1 creative test per week. So if you're spending $2,000 a day, which is about $60K per month, then you should be launching at least 2 creative tests per week, aka 8 creative tests for the entire month. And if you're curious about how I'm testing new creatives on Meta, I do have a video that's gonna go more in depth on that. Now, of course, this 1 creative test per week per every $1,000 role, there's a little bit of nuance here too. As you learn in Meta ads, there's always a bit of nuance. It all really, really depends on your data and your business economics and your capabilities. So let's talk about those creative tests per week, right? I said that for every $1,000 of ad spend per day, that should equal at least 1 creative test per week. So we've mapped out the scaling plan. Now let's figure out how many creative tests this brand should be making every single week. So we can see here, not quite at the $2,000 per month, but maybe they're like, hey, we actually can go up to 2. That kind of flexibility is totally fine. Maybe they want to keep it 2 here, but then when they get here, it can be around 3. But again, I do think there's a little bit of flexibility. Where I actually see people messing up on this more is where they're just clearly not testing enough creative, which I have seen a number of times. But this rule of thumb does tend to help brands stay on track. Now I want to talk a little bit about a product that people actually want. And I think the best way to actually illustrate this is to tell you about a conversation that I had recently with a CEO who actually owns and operates multiple brands. And something that we were actually talking about was the product launch roadmap coming up over the next few months. And he actually said that the only way that he is going to launch a new product in 2025 and 2026 is if he knows for certain that it has a good chance to succeed on Meta ads. And he thinks, and I also think, that the best way to have your product actually have a shot on Meta ads is it has to be actually solving a problem. Now, I've talked about this a little bit on TikTok and on YouTube Shorts and on Reels, and to be honest, it kind of makes people upset when I say, hey, yeah, your product actually has to be solving a problem or else you're gonna have a hard time on Meta ads. But it's the truth. However, with that said, I think that there's always room for products that are able to lean into a core human desire. Now, I think that True Classics actually does this really, really well. They were able to scale up quite a bit on Meta ads, and they actually just hit 100 million customers, which is crazy. And by the way, they are a t-shirt brand, which, you know, there are many t-shirt brands advertising on Facebook ads, and this is not a revolutionary or new product, but I do think that the way that they've used their messaging and their product assortment to lean into those key human desires have really helped them to scale up. This is something that I've heard from many media buyers. Oh, if I'm working with a brand that's not problem solution oriented, really see how you can back into the core human desires of romance, of money and power, of societal acceptance. I've seen brands get somewhere with that. However, the brands that scale the biggest, go the furthest, and have the biggest impact on a large group of people are ones that are more problem solution oriented. It doesn't mean that it needs to be a new revolutionary product. It could just be a product that is doing something slightly different or speaks to a new audience in a better way. I've seen brands really struggle to get past the point of spending $100K per month on their Meta ads. And oftentimes it is the telltale sign of a product not being scalable enough or the economics of it not working out. Now I want to talk about scaling stories. I actually mapped out how I remember us scaling up this specific brand. They actually only had a monthly budget of around $90K to $100K. And by the end of that month, we actually scaled them up to $500K in ad spend profitably. And the way that we did this is every few days we'd be increasing anywhere from 20% to 30%, depending on how good the day-to-day results were. So you can see right here, oh, we started increasing by 20%, but then we went to 30%. We let results stabilize, saw that it was really good, decided to increase another 30%, then back down to 20% because maybe results weren't so good, and so on and so forth until we were able to hit more of that 525K number. Another one of the brands that I worked with had a scaling story that looked a little bit more like this. They were doing 20%. They didn't want to go above that because their ad account was a little bit more volatile. And again, their monthly budget was $30K per month. So they decided to increase spend by 20%, wait an entire week, then they did it again, and they were taking a little bit more of a gradual approach so that they could get to that 105K per month mark. And for the creative testing, it looked a little bit more like this. They really started ramping up their creative production quite a bit. And that's it. I'm so excited to be sitting down here every single week with you guys. Be sure to leave me some love in the comments and let me know what video you'd like to see in the coming weeks, because I am trying to ramp up to 2 videos per week. I am saying it here, hold me accountable. And I'd love to have your help on that to know what you would like to see from me more often. And I'll see you next week. Cheers.